Democracy is a popular form of government in this current era. Thus, it is necessary to evaluate whether democracy increases quality of life. Today, our topic will become focusing on the topic of democracy and to what extent does it lead to higher quality of life. We have answered this question from an economic, ethical, scientific, historical, and social-cultural perspective in order to come up with different viewpoints for the same topic. Overall, our research has shown that democracy effectively leads to higher quality of life.
From an economic perspective, democracy indirectly leads to higher quality of life. Democracy causes economic growth, which in turn increases the quality of life of the citizens. A joint study conducted by professors from MIT, Harvard, and Columbia universities found that a democratic transition will result in a 20% increase in GDP over the next 30 years, as shown by this graph. This economic success can be attributed to two factors: stability and competition. Empirically, democratic countries are much more economically stable than non-democratic countries. This leads to increased incentive for investment, which boosts the overall economy of the country. Democratic countries also have extremely competitive markets due to the low costs to start a business. This competition sparks innovation and keeps prices low, further boosting the economy of the country. How does this affect quality of life? The increase in GDP will likely result in higher wages for citizens and more money being spent in public services such as healthcare and education. Citizens will also be able to buy more goods for a smaller price due to competitive pricing. Overall, democracy improves quality of life for the citizens by the means of economic growth.
From an ethical perspective, democracy protects ethics, which increases quality of life. So, two ethical benefits induced by democracy are rights and liberties. The most fundamental principle of democracy is that its citizens are allowed to participate in electoral voting. And when citizens are allowed to do this, they are granted the rights to express their political beliefs, protect their political beliefs, and spread and propagate their political beliefs. According to Andrew Hurd, a luminary in the field of Canadian constitutional and institutional issues, rights induced by democracy fulfill mankind's innate and intuitive desire to reach for higher quality of life. Some advocate that democratic rights fortify the rights to do wrong. But this is only a minor argument in the matter in question, and it is totally outweighed by the positive benefits of democratic rights. In addition, democracy preserves and regulates liberties. For example, in the democratic state America, the First Amendment regulates freedoms, and the Constitution protects these freedoms from corruption and abuse. This graph shows the correlation between economic freedom and the increase in human development indicator. And it's obvious that there's a positive correlation between economic freedom and quality of life. So overall, ethical benefits induced by democracy increases quality of life. Now the scientific perspective will provide some evidences that will fortify the benefits of democracy.
So, many of the founding fathers of America, such as Franklin, Roosevelt, and Washington, all shared the strong belief in the importance of science and pursuit of knowledge. They set out to establish an effective and responsive government based off of reason and scientific data. This scientific belief can be applied to democracy in order to increase the efficiency of government, meaning better representation for the people, and it will establish a responsive government based off of reason and scientific data, thus leading to a higher quality of life for its citizens. From this graph, we can see that there's a positive relationship between democracy and the Human Development Index, which includes education. The Center for Science and Democracy, under the Union of Concerned Scientists, seek to improve quality of life by helping journalists, politicians, and the general public distinguish between propaganda and credible sources. This is important because it educates the general public and it helps them make better decisions. The involvement of science in public and private issues within a democratic government means that there will be thinkers who are able to find solutions through the use of in-depth analysis. With scientific involvement in important issues in our society, The innovative ideas proposed by these individuals will definitely benefit the problem-solving process by approaching the question from a logical perspective. Therefore, as more problems in our society are addressed, the quality of life will increase.
While many other lenses prove that democracy is beneficial for quality of life, in history, that is not always the case. For example, in the 1900s, China was a democratic state. However, its democratic state was corrupted by the rich, and the wealthy people overrun the system, leading the lower class people to suffer in poverty and famine. However, at the same time, there's a strong comparison between the US and the Soviet Union during the same time period. The Soviet Union, which was authoritative, was actually only a third of the quality of life of the US, while the US was democratic, which goes to show how there are two sides to this story. In a research study done by Michael D. Stroop, an economic and political right professor at Austin State University, he did a research study done on many different countries and their economic freedom index and political rights index. What we can summarize from his research is that the higher the economic freedom, the greater the life expectancy. However, the higher the political rights, the lower the life expectancy. And the higher the political rights, generally speaking, the higher the democratic index, which means that the higher democratic state, the more democratic it is, the more the life expectancy.
And now I'll be talking about the social and cultural lenses. So for a country to become democratic, it must have went through a phase called democratization. And then most countries, they either go through it internally or externally. Today I'll be talking about how external democratization lowers the quality of life by implementing a social and cultural border. So I'll be looking at two cases today, Germany and Iraq. So Germany, after World War II, was forced into a democratic society. There was the older population, the people who were born before World War II. Those are the ones who were born during the times of the monarchy and authoritatives. They looked at leaders such as Adolf Hitler as people who led. They didn't believe that leaders had to vote or act, or vote or decide. They just decided that leaders should be leading. They should be a head. They should be like a face of the whole society. But in the younger generation, they were quickly, in a way, brainwashed by the outside cultures. They believed that all of the horrors of World War II were their fault. So then they were quickly against the right wing. So basically what happened during the end of the 20th century was that Germany had very little resemblance of the right wing. It still occurs today. Anyone who expresses nationalistic views or even criticizes immigration policy is said to be a Nazi or an alt-right winger. And I'll be looking at Iraq. So Iraq went through a really similar case. Iraq is probably the most recent democratization from the United States. So the George Bush Foundation, or his committee, set up a democratic regime that tried to resemble their own as much as possible. The goal was to create like an Islamic democracy, like Turkey. But the problem with Islamic democracies is that their religion and their government were very much connected, while the United States tried to make it not like that. And the first election of Iraq in 2004 was really successful. They had a voter turnout of 58%, which was the same as the 2016 presidential election, even though there were threats of terrorist attacks. But then, during the day of the election, 44 people were murdered by insurgents and terrorists. But what happened was that in Iraq, there was already a huge borders between the Sunni and the Shia populations. So the voting even created an even larger gap by causing a majority government run by the Sunni, which quickly led to the violence directed towards Shias, just for being different.
So in conclusion, there's a definite correlation between democracy and quality of life, because democracy provides benefits which increases quality of life. And that will conclude our presentation.
All right, question time. We're gonna start with, why not? Your group discussed everyone's perspectives, right? How did your discussion affect your conclusion?
Well, obviously, for all research questions, there are some positive sides and some negative sides. And the positive sides were the economical and ethical benefits and the scientific benefits. But then the negative sides were historical and the social cultural perspectives. We came to the conclusion that democracy is positive towards higher quality of life because there were more evidences which supported the better side, the pro side, than the con side.
Okay. My next question is for Ethan. What were the strongest counter arguments to your group's solution?
Solutions? Well, one reason why was like we sort of like doubted the data a little bit is because we looked at previous democracies. Like we looked at like World War II, World War I. It was like democratic societies versus like non-democratic, communism, fascism, right? And we sort of looked at that as a reason that wasn't like proof. During time, the majority of the governments were democratic. Like World War II, for example, after World War II, the Cold War, like there was basically a majority of Europe and USA against Russia and Cuba. So we sort of looked at that as like in my case, I couldn't find proper evidence that democratization like actually helped through social and cultural. So I have to say that like I think the reason that there was like things doubting our total argument was that there wasn't enough like real evidence, like historical evidence, like saying that democratization is good, like isolated by itself.
Okay. My next question is for Shay. How did Kevin's information affect how you thought of this question?
Kevin's information kind of talked about how science benefits democracy and democracy benefits quality of life. So by Kevin's perspective, we kind of learned how science is important in preserving democracy and keeping it like true democracy and so it's not corrupt. And that's how it.
Okay, so my next question is for Kevin. Reflecting on all of your colleagues' work, who had the greatest impact on your group's?
Greatest impact.
Yeah.
I think it'd probably be Austin because he made a really strong counter argument. In the case of China, he made a pretty good counter argument because, we started off with our pros, right? We started off with democracy does lead to higher quality of life, and we followed up with counter arguments where China does not. China is an example where the democracy did not lead to a higher quality of life. I think that was a pretty good counter argument.
Okay. And for Austin, having gone through this whole process, how has this group project affected your ability to work in a group? Have you learned anything about group dynamics?
Yes, I have. It goes to show how everybody's different, so we all have different perspectives. So really learning how to cooperate and merge all of these perspectives and take each other's point of view makes it so that we can cohere and make a better PowerPoint that covers a lot more and a lot more in detail.
Okay, thanks.